The story begins in a quiet Balkan village. Today it might be in modern-day Bosnia, Serbia, or Bulgaria. It is the mid-1500s. Night has fallen, but the silence doesn't last long. A group of Ottoman soldiers marches into the settlement, carrying with them a registry of households. They go door to door, not looking for food, not for wealth, but for children. Families know what this means, the dreaded devshirme, the blood tax. Mothers cling to their sons, fathers argue, priests pray under their breath. Yet resistance is useless. The soldiers select the strongest, the brightest-eyed, sometimes even the youngest, barely 6 or 7 years old. One boy, no older than 9, screams as he is ripped from his mother's arms. She collapses on the dirt floor. That child will never see his family again. What awaited him was not death, but something worse: transformation. He would be converted, renamed, trained, and stripped of everything that once defined him. For some, this meant rising in the ranks of the Ottoman military, even becoming powerful janissaries. But for others, especially the most physically beautiful boys, another fate loomed inside the walls of the Sultan's palace. There, in the shadow of Topkapi, the line between servant, soldier, and slave blurred. And in the darkest corners, the reality of concubinage, of young men used for pleasure, not power, emerged. The blood tax, where the boys came from. The devshirme system began in the late 14th century and peaked in the 15th through 17th centuries. The Ottomans targeted Christian populations in the Balkans, modern-day Greece, Albania, Bosnia, Croatia, Bulgaria, and Serbia. Every 3 to 5 years, officials conducted levies, demanding that villagers hand over their sons, usually aged 8 to 18. Officially, these boys were destined for the Janissary Corps, the empire's elite infantry, or for administrative service. They were prized for their loyalty, since they were uprooted from family ties and reconditioned to serve only the Sultan. Yet, physical beauty and youth also played a role in selection. Ottoman observers noted the importance of clear skin, good teeth, and sharp eyes. The most striking boys were often separated early and sent not to the barracks, but into the Sultan's household, the palace, and the shadow of concubinage. Within Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, another system unfolded. While the Sultan's female harem is famous, less spoken of is the presence of male slaves and concubines. Many served as eunuchs, castrated men who guarded the harem, or as attendants in the palace courts. But some were selected for companionship and intimacy with powerful men, including the Sultan himself. European travelers of the 16th and 17th centuries, such as Busbek, and later travelers from Venice and France, recorded unsettling accounts of the Sultan's fondness for adolescent boys. Pederasty, relationships between older men and younger boys, was not uncommon among the Ottoman elite. In fact, it was woven into poetry, celebrated in certain cultural spaces like the bathhouses, hammams, and tacitly tolerated so long as it remained within the walls of the palace or slave quarters. For a boy torn from a Balkan village, this meant the possibility of being reshaped into a concubine, a servant not of war, but of the Sultan's bed. Forced conversion and identity destruction. One of the most horrifying aspects wasn't only physical, it was psychological. Upon arrival, boys were circumcised, forcibly converted to Islam, and given new Turkish or Arabic names. They were forbidden from speaking their native tongues, singing their village songs, or remembering their Christian heritage. Older boys, already broken by the system, often enforced the rules on newcomers. This cycle of assimilation created a brutal environment of peer-enforced silence. The result? An identity completely rewritten. Even those who rose to prominence, like Sokolu Mehmed Pasha, a Devshirme boy who became Grand Vizier, were symbols of this transformation. Though he wielded immense power, he was still a man whose childhood, name and faith had been erased. For those reduced to concubinage, the loss of identity was coupled with lifelong shame and silence. Eunuchs, the broken guardians, a particularly chilling fate awaited boys marked for service as eunuchs. Captured not only from the Balkans but also from Africa and the Caucasus, they were castrated before being sold into the Ottoman system. Some guarded the harem, others attended to the Sultan directly. Castration was often performed crudely, with a high death rate. Survivors lived with permanent physical and psychological scars. Ironically, eunuchs held great power within the palace. The chief black eunuch, Kızlar Ağası, was one of the most influential men in the empire. Yet beneath this hierarchy was unimaginable suffering. Boys mutilated to ensure obedience and prevent rival dynasties from forming within the palace. Sexual practices and secrecy. While the Devshirme was officially about producing soldiers and statesmen, Ottoman court culture blurred those lines. Accounts suggest that some boys were used sexually by sultans, governors, and high officials. The poet Baki and others even wrote verses celebrating the beauty of beardless youths, idealized as objects of desire. Publicly, Islamic law condemned homosexuality, but privately, the powerful operated under different rules. Slaves, after all, had no rights. For the boys, secrecy was survival. Speaking about what occurred in the Sultan's chambers could mean execution. Some were poisoned, others simply disappeared. European envoys whispered of this hidden world, but few details were ever confirmed because the victims themselves had no voices. Cultural normalization of pederasty. Pederasty existed across many societies, from ancient Greece to Renaissance Italy, and the Ottoman world was no exception. In fact, the Ottomans had a reputation in Europe for tolerating what others called the sin against nature. Travelers noted janissaries forming intimate bonds with younger boys, sometimes couched as brotherhoods. In the hammams of Istanbul, relationships between men and youths were an open secret. But what makes the Ottoman case horrifying is not only the existence of pederasty, it was the institutional scale. The Devshirme provided a steady supply of young boys. Those who were not strong enough for war could easily be redirected into roles of servitude and pleasure. The psychological toll. Imagine being 9 years old, taken from your mother's arms, renamed, circumcised, forbidden to speak your language, and then forced into the Sultan's private service. For some, the palace meant opportunity and wealth. For others, it meant unspeakable abuse. The psychological trauma extended beyond the individual to entire communities. In Balkan villages, the fear of the blood tax haunted generations. Families sometimes mutilated their sons, breaking teeth or blinding them, to make them undesirable to Ottoman recruiters. Others converted to Islam voluntarily, hoping to escape the levy. Yet the trauma lived on. Songs, folk tales, and oral histories across Greece, Serbia, and Bulgaria still echo the pain of losing children to the Ottoman system. From power to silence, some boys became powerful viziers or generals, commanding armies and shaping the empire. But for those who were concubines, eunuchs, or companions, their stories rarely survived. Shame, secrecy, and the silencing power of the Ottoman court buried their voices. And this, perhaps, is the most horrifying act of all. Not just the taking of bodies, but the erasure of lives and stories. These boys were absorbed into the empire so completely that their original identities disappeared, leaving only whispers in foreign travelers' notes and fragments of Balkan memory. Conclusion: the forgotten boys of empire. The Ottoman Empire was one of the most powerful in history, stretching across 3 continents, ruling for centuries. Its legacy includes art, architecture, law, and science. But beneath the domes of mosques and the arches of palaces lies a darker story, the story of the boys who never came home. The Devshirme system institutionalized the abduction of children. The palace culture normalized their sexualization. Eunuchs were mutilated into lifelong servitude, and countless concubines lived and died in silence, their humanity erased in service to the Sultan's pleasure. Today, the lands once under Ottoman rule, Greece, Serbia, Bulgaria, Bosnia, Albania, still carry echoes of that trauma. Folk songs of lament, whispered family legends, and even resistance movements trace their roots to the blood tax and the loss of sons. When we speak of empire, we often remember the glory. But behind the glory of the Ottomans lies a chilling truth, that some of the most horrifying acts were not battles fought on fields, but the quiet destruction of young boys within the Sultan's palace.